There are moments in life when a single word changes everything. Not a long speech, not a complicated explanation, just one word spoken at the right time. A doctor enters a quiet room and says a single sentence, and a family's entire future suddenly shifts. A friend whispers something simple, "I'm here," and a heart that was drowning begins to breathe again. A parent calls their child by name, and that name carries years of love, history, and meaning within it. We live inside words more than we realize. Think about the phrases that shape your daily life. Bismillah before you begin something. Alhamdulillah when something goes right. Inshallah when the future is uncertain. These are not merely habits of speech. For many people, they are quiet anchors that hold the rhythm of life together. They mark beginnings, endings, gratitude, hope. Yet rarely do we stop and ask a deeper question. What actually lives inside the words we speak? Not just their dictionary meaning, but the deeper reality they carry. How can a short phrase calm a troubled heart? Why does repeating a divine name sometimes bring a strange sense of steadiness, even when circumstances have not changed? And why do certain words seem to echo inside a person long after they are spoken? Long before modern linguistics tried to understand language as a system, many spiritual teachers believed that speech itself carried layers of meaning far deeper than ordinary communication. Among them was Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, a scholar, teacher, and spiritual guide whose insights influenced generations of seekers, philosophers, and scientists. For Imam Jafar, letters were not merely tools humans invented to write down thoughts. They were signs of something deeper, a reflection of how meaning moves through the world. Imagine watching someone write a word. From the outside, you see ink forming shapes on a page, but inside those shapes are sounds. Inside those sounds are meanings, and inside those meanings are entire experiences of life. A single word can hold joy, grief, memory, promise, or prayer. Imam Jafar taught that letters are the smallest visible units of that mystery. Just as a building is constructed from individual stones, words are built from letters, and those letters carry subtle qualities that shape the meaning they form together. This idea may sound abstract at first, but if you pay attention, you can already feel it in ordinary life. Some words feel soft when spoken, almost like they settle gently on the tongue. Others feel sharp or heavy. Some names seem to carry warmth the moment they are heard. Others carry gravity or authority. Even without studying language deeply, people instinctively sense that sounds influence emotion. Think about the name of someone you love. The moment you hear it, something inside you responds before your mind has time to analyze it. The sound itself carries recognition. Or consider the way a prayer rises from the lips when a person is overwhelmed. In that moment, the person is not carefully analyzing grammar or vocabulary. The heart simply reaches for words that feel alive. Perhaps this is why sacred traditions have always treated language with a kind of quiet reverence. In the Islamic tradition, the Qur'an itself begins not with a story or an argument, but with a word. Iqra, read, recite, receive. And throughout history, seekers have reflected on the way divine speech flows through language. The Sufi master Ibn Arabi often described existence itself as something like a vast unfolding expression, an ongoing articulation of divine wisdom appearing through countless forms. If the universe is filled with meaning, then language is not separate from that meaning. It is one of the ways human beings learn to recognize it. This is where the science known as **ilm al-Huruf, the science of letters, begins to enter the conversation. But before the mind rushes to imagine hidden codes or mystical puzzles, it is important to understand something simple. The people who explored these teachings were not chasing magical shortcuts or secret formulas. They were seekers trying to understand how meaning travels through creation, how the smallest elements of speech might reflect deeper patterns of reality. In other words, they were asking a quiet but powerful question. If the world is filled with signs, could letters themselves be among those signs? And if that is true, then every word we speak may carry more weight than we realize. When a person says Bismillah before beginning something, it is not only a cultural habit. It is a reminder that nothing truly begins with us. When someone whispers Ya Rahman in desperation, they are not only repeating a name, they are reaching toward mercy itself. Perhaps this is why sacred language has endured for centuries, because beneath the sounds and shapes of letters, something deeper continues to move. Imam Jafar al-Sadiq once suggested that understanding even a single letter completely would reveal an entire universe of meaning. His students spent years contemplating what that might mean. And maybe the reason is this. Most people believe they use words simply to describe the world around them. But what if words are also shaping the way the world appears to them? What if the letters that form our speech are not only tools of expression, but invitations to understand reality more deeply? To explore that possibility, we must begin with a larger question, one that lies at the heart of Sufi thought itself. If nothing in creation is random, could language also be part of that divine order? If you spend enough time observing life, a quiet realization begins to emerge. What once seemed random slowly reveals patterns. The same lesson appears in different forms. The same question returns again and again, wearing different faces. A delay that once felt meaningless later becomes the turning point that redirected an entire life. For the people of spiritual insight, this was never surprising. One of the central ideas in Sufi thought is that existence is not chaotic. It unfolds according to wisdom, even when that wisdom remains hidden for a time. The Qur'an repeatedly reminds humanity that creation was made with measure, not loosely, not carelessly, but with precision that often escapes immediate understanding. You can see this in the rhythms of the natural world, the way seasons change, the way night returns after every day, the way seeds become trees in silence beneath the soil. None of this happens accidentally. Everything moves according to a balance that sustains life. The Sufi masters believe this same principle extends into human experience as well. What appears as coincidence often contains meaning. What appears as interruption may carry instruction, and what appears as ordinary may quietly be a sign. Ibn Arabi once wrote that the universe is filled with ayat, signs pointing toward deeper realities. But these signs do not always arrive as dramatic miracles. More often, they appear through familiar moments, a conversation that lingers in the mind, a difficulty that reshapes a person's character, a delay that forces patience, a word that suddenly opens understanding. Life teaches slowly, but it teaches constantly. And if existence itself is woven from signs, then language, the system humans use to describe reality, may also carry layers of meaning deeper than we first assume. This is where the teachings surrounding al-Huruf begin to make sense within a broader spiritual framework. The science of letters was never meant to be a spectacle. It was not designed to impress people with secret knowledge or mystical codes. In fact, many scholars warn that approaching it with curiosity alone often leads to confusion. Instead, it was understood as a contemplative way of looking at language. Consider how certain words seem to carry a weight that cannot be fully explained by grammar alone. When someone recites a verse from the Qur'an, the sound of the recitation affects the listener even before the mind fully processes the meaning. Something in the arrangement of the letters, the rhythm, the breath, the tone, touches the heart directly. This is not imagination. It is an experience shared by millions of people across generations. A person may not speak Arabic fluently, yet the sound of Quranic recitation can still bring tears to their eyes. A divine name repeated in quiet remembrance may begin to calm an anxious mind. A single verse remembered during hardship can restore patience when everything else feels uncertain. Why does this happen? Part of the answer lies in meaning, but another part may lie deeper, in the structure of the language itself. Imam Jafar al-Sadiq suggested that letters are not neutral shapes assembled randomly into words. Each letter participates in a larger system of meaning. When letters combine to form words, they create patterns that reflect different qualities of existence. This does not mean every word carries a mystical secret waiting to be decoded. The point is subtler than that. Letters, sounds, meanings, and intentions interact with each other. When a person speaks consciously, these elements align in a way that gives language power. When speech becomes careless or empty, the connection weakens. You can see this difference in ordinary life. Two people can say the exact same sentence, yet it lands differently depending on the sincerity behind it. One apology restores trust. Another apology feels hollow. One prayer feels alive. Another feels mechanical. The words may be identical. The difference lies in presence. Sufi teachers often emphasize that meaning does not live in language alone. It lives in the meeting between sound, intention, and awareness. When Imam Jafar spoke about letters as principles, he was pointing toward this deeper relationship. Letters are the smallest building blocks of speech, but speech itself is one of the ways human beings participate in meaning. Think about the divine names often repeated in remembrance. When someone calls upon Ar-Rahman, they are invoking mercy. When they call upon Al-Hakim, they acknowledge wisdom beyond their own understanding. When they call upon As-Sabr, they are reminding their own soul that patience is not passive waiting, but trust in timing that is not yet visible. The letters forming these names are not random arrangements. They belong to a language whose structure developed within revelation and spiritual reflection over centuries. And this brings us back to a quiet realization. If existence itself unfolds with measure, if signs are woven throughout ordinary life, and if language is one of the primary ways humans interpret those signs, then perhaps letters are not merely passive tools. Perhaps they participate, in their own subtle way, in the architecture of meaning. This does not mean that understanding letters instantly unlocks the secrets of the universe. The masters themselves were careful to remind their students that knowledge requires humility, patience, and discipline. But it does suggest something remarkable. The same alphabet used to write ordinary words may also contain hints about how meaning moves through creation. And if that is true, then every letter, no matter how small, may carry a world within it. To see that world more clearly, we have to slow down and look closely at the letters themselves. Because according to the teachings attributed to Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, each letter is not just a sound. It is a quality, a presence, a subtle force shaping the words that shape our understanding of reality. Once you begin to look at language more carefully, something subtle becomes visible. Letters are not only shapes written on a page, they are movements of the breath, gestures of the tongue, and rhythms of sound. Every time a word is spoken, the body participates in its creation. The lips open or close. The tongue presses or releases. Air rises from the chest and becomes voice. In that moment, a letter is no longer just a symbol. It becomes an action. This is one of the insights that fascinated many early seekers who reflected on language. They realized that letters are not silent objects. Each one emerges from the body in a particular way, carrying its own character, its own texture of sound. Some letters feel light and open when spoken, as if the breath flows freely through them. Others feel grounded and heavy, requiring the tongue or lips to press firmly. Some stretch upward in a clear vertical sound. Others curve softly, rolling across the mouth like a quiet stream. Even people who have never studied linguistics can sense this difference. Try speaking two different words slowly, one that begins with a soft sound and another that begins with something firm or sharp. Your mouth moves differently. Your breath changes. The sound enters the air with a different quality. These subtle variations are usually ignored in everyday conversation. We use language quickly, without pausing to notice how it is formed. But the scholars and spiritual teachers who explored al-Huruf, the science of letters, believed these differences were not meaningless. They believed letters carry qualities. Not magical properties, but subtle characteristics that shape the atmosphere of a word. When letters combine, those qualities blend together to form the tone, rhythm, and emotional weight of speech. In the Arabic language, this becomes especially noticeable because the alphabet is closely tied to sound. Each letter is pronounced distinctly, emerging from a specific point in the mouth or throat. Reciters of the Qur'an spend years studying these articulation points, learning how each letter must be released with precision. But beyond pronunciation, some spiritual teachers believe the letters also reflect symbolic qualities that resonate with human experience. Consider the letter Alif. It stands upright, simple and straight, almost like a vertical line reaching from earth toward the sky. When written, it appears calm and solitary. It carries no curve, no complexity, just a quiet presence that seems to point upward. For many contemplatives, Alif became a symbol of unity, origin, and direct connection. It represents something simple and indivisible. In spiritual language, it often evokes the idea that beneath the complexity of the world, there remains a single source holding everything together. Now consider another letter, Ba. Unlike Alif, Ba stretches horizontally, resting upon the page with a single point beneath it. Its shape feels grounded, extended, almost as though it has stepped outward from that original vertical axis into a wider space. For those who reflected on these forms, Ba symbolized the beginning of relationship, the moment when unity unfolds into interaction, the moment when something that was singular begins to appear in multiple forms. Whether one accepts these interpretations literally or simply as contemplative reflections, the symbolism offers a way of looking at language that feels almost poetic. Letters begin to resemble gestures. Alif stands. Ba extends. Other letters curve, bend, close, open, flow, or anchor. When these gestures combine into words, they create patterns that feel alive. Think of the word Allah. Even before analyzing its theological meaning, many people feel something distinct in the way the word moves. The sound begins deep in the chest, opens in the mouth, and ends with a soft breath that almost dissolves into silence. Recited slowly, it feels less like a label and more like a return. Or consider the word Rama, mercy. The sound carries softness and openness. When spoken gently, it seems to unfold rather than strike. These impressions are not scientific measurements. They are experiential observations, yet they reveal something important. Language affects us not only through intellectual meaning, but through sound, rhythm, and presence. This is why recitation in sacred traditions is treated with such care. The way a word is spoken can shape how its meaning enters the heart. A person repeating a divine name slowly and attentively may find that the sound itself begins to calm the mind. Not because the letters are performing some mysterious trick, but because the rhythm of breath, intention, and remembrance gradually gathers scattered thoughts into a single focus. Over time, the reciter begins to notice something unexpected. The letters they repeat begin to repeat them. In other words, the person who recites the word begins to be reshaped by it. A person who frequently calls upon mercy begins to look for mercy. Someone who remembers wisdom becomes less impatient with life's timing. Someone who invokes patience begins to discover patience growing quietly within them. The letters do not force change, but they guide attention toward certain qualities, and attention has a way of transforming the one who gives it. This insight was one of the quiet foundations of the science of letters. It was not about discovering secret formulas hidden inside words. It was about learning to listen to language more deeply, recognizing that speech participates in shaping awareness. Imam Jafar al-Sadiq and others who contemplated these teachings believed that when a person begins to understand the qualities carried by letters, they start to read language differently. Words are no longer only information. They become signs of meaning moving through sound, breath, and intention. But among all the letters studied by seekers, two seem to hold a special place in the contemplative imagination: Alif and Ba. Not because they were mysterious puzzles waiting to be solved, but because they represented something fundamental about the relationship between unity and multiplicity, between the source of existence and the world where that existence unfolds into countless forms. Among the many reflections that emerged from the science of letters, few captured the imagination of seekers more deeply than the relationship between two simple letters, Alif and Ba. At first glance, they appear almost too simple to carry any special meaning. Alif is a single upright stroke. Ba is a horizontal line with a single point beneath it. Yet for those who spent years contemplating the structure of language, these two letters seem to illustrate something fundamental about the nature of existence itself. Look closely at Alif. It stands alone, a single vertical line rising upward without curve or division. It does not bend toward another letter. It does not close in on itself. Its form is almost austere in its simplicity. For many contemplatives, this shape became a quiet symbol of unity. Not unity in the sense of uniformity, but unity as origin, the unseen source from which everything else emerges, the silent beginning before words take shape. In Sufi reflection, Alif often came to represent the idea that beneath the countless forms of creation, there remains a single reality holding them together. That is why some teachers described Alif as the letter that points upward. Its form reminds the observer of a vertical axis, something connecting earth and heaven, visible life and unseen source. And yet in everyday language, Alif rarely stands alone. Words are not built from unity alone. They require movement, relation, and interaction. They require a step outward from the single line into a wider field of expression. This is where Ba appears. Ba stretches across the page horizontally, resting upon the surface of writing. Beneath it sits a single dot, small but deliberate, marking its identity. Compared to Alif, Ba feels different. It does not rise upward in isolation. It extends outward. It suggests contact, connection, and the beginning of something unfolding. For many seekers reflecting on these forms, Ba symbolized the moment when unity begins to appear as multiplicity, the moment when the source expresses itself through relationships, forms, and experiences. In spiritual language, one could say that Alif represents the origin, while Ba represents the beginning of manifestation. This symbolism becomes especially intriguing when we notice where Ba appears in daily life. One of the most familiar phrases spoken by Muslims across the world begins with it: Bismillah. Before starting a task, opening a meal, beginning a journey, or entering an important moment, a person quietly says these words, "In the name of Allah." For most people, it is a simple act of remembrance, a way of acknowledging that life itself unfolds under divine care. But from the perspective of contemplative reflection, the first letter of that phrase becomes meaningful. It begins with Ba, not with Alif. The word does not start from the solitary vertical line of unity. It begins with the letter that expresses relationship. This subtle shift carries a profound reminder. Human life does not begin from independence. It begins from connection. A person does not create themselves. They are born into a web of relationships: family, community, earth, sky, breath, and time. Even the most personal actions unfold within a larger framework of existence. Saying Bismillah is therefore more than a habit of speech. It is a recognition of dependence. You begin something not as the ultimate source of power, but as someone participating in a world sustained by a wisdom beyond your control. This is why many Sufi teachers encourage their students to pause before speaking or acting. That brief pause allows awareness to return. It reminds the heart that every step begins within a relationship, with the Creator, with creation, and with the responsibilities carried in between. Seen in this light, Alif and Ba form a quiet lesson. Alif reminds the seeker that beneath all appearances there is unity. Ba reminds the seeker that life unfolds through relationship. Neither can be ignored. If someone clings only to unity, they may try to escape the responsibilities of the world. If someone lives only within multiplicity, they may forget the source that gives life meaning. The spiritual path often involves learning how to hold both realities at once. You live among people, tasks, difficulties, and choices, the world of Ba, yet you remain aware that beneath all of it lies the deeper stillness of Alif. This balance becomes visible in simple moments. A person pauses before beginning work and whispers Bismillah. Someone facing difficulty quietly says Hasbiya Allah, Allah is enough for me. Another person receiving good news responds with Alhamdulillah. In each case, a word becomes a bridge between daily life and deeper awareness. The letters forming those words are small, but the meanings they carry stretch far beyond their shapes. For Imam Jafar al-Sadiq and other contemplative scholars, these reflections were not meant to turn language into a puzzle. They were invitations to pay attention. Language, like life, is layered. What appears simple often hides a deeper structure beneath it. And sometimes the smallest element reveal the largest truths. A single upright line reminding us of unity. A single extended letter reminding us of relationship. Together they whisper a quiet lesson about existence itself. But the science of letters did not stop with individual symbols. Those who studied them also noticed something else hidden within sacred language. Mysterious sequences of letters appearing at the beginnings of certain chapters of the Qur'an. Letters spoken before any explanation appears. Letters that seem to stand alone, inviting reflection. And for centuries, these mysterious openings have stirred the curiosity of readers and scholars alike. If you open the Qur'an and begin reading carefully, you will notice something curious. Certain chapters begin not with a sentence or a story, but with a small group of letters standing alone. Alif Lam Mim, Yasin, Hamim, Taha. These letters appear quietly at the beginning of 29 different chapters. They are not part of a normal word. They are recited individually, each sound pronounced separately, as if the reader is being asked to pause and listen carefully before the message begins. For centuries, scholars, theologians, and seekers have reflected on these mysterious openings. They are known as al-Huruf al-Muqatat, the disconnected letters. And despite generations of study, their full meaning has never been universally agreed upon. Some scholars simply say, Allah knows best what they mean. Others suggest they function as a kind of spiritual doorway, preparing the listener's heart before the verses unfold. And among contemplative thinkers like Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, these letters were sometimes approached as reminders that revelation itself contains layers deeper than immediate explanation. In other words, the Qur'an does not only speak through clear statements. Sometimes it begins with signs that must be contemplated. At first, this might feel puzzling. Why would sacred scripture open with letters that seem incomplete? But when you reflect on life itself, the pattern becomes strangely familiar. Human experience often begins the same way. A person receives a sign before they receive understanding. Think about how many moments in life start with something unexplained. A conversation that lingers in your mind for years. a delay that feels frustrating at first but later reveals unexpected mercy, a loss that makes no sense when it happens, yet slowly transforms the direction of your life. At the beginning, these moments feel like isolated fragments. Just as those Quranic letters stand alone on the page, certain experiences appear in our lives without explanation. Only later does the meaning begin to unfold. This is why many Sufi teachers approached the mysterious letters not as a puzzle to solve, but as an invitation to humility. They remind the reader that knowledge does not always arrive all at once. Sometimes understanding comes gradually, as the heart becomes ready to receive it. Consider the way a person grows in faith. At first, they may repeat words they learned from childhood, phrases like Bismillah, Inshallah, or Alhamdulillah. The meanings are understood in a basic way, but the depth of those words unfolds slowly over the years. A hardship reveals the meaning of patience. A blessing reveals the meaning of gratitude. A delay reveals the meaning of trust. Suddenly, the same words that once felt simple begin to feel profound. The letters were always there. The difference was the reader. In a similar way, the mysterious letters at the beginning of certain Quranic chapters remind us that divine speech is layered. Some meanings appear immediately. Others require contemplation, patience, and a lifetime of reflection. When someone recites Alif, Lam, Mim, they are not just pronouncing three sounds. They are acknowledging that revelation contains depths beyond human certainty. It is a moment of pause. A moment that says, what follows deserves attention. In daily life, we often rush past signs because we expect everything to make sense instantly. But sacred language teaches a different posture. It invites patience with mystery. And perhaps that is one of the hidden lessons of these letters. Life itself contains moments that resemble them. A person encounters something they cannot immediately explain. A door closes. A new path appears unexpectedly. A word from someone echoes long after it is spoken. At the time, it feels incomplete, like a letter standing alone on a page. But years later, the rest of the sentence becomes clear. This perspective transforms the way we approach uncertainty. Instead of assuming that every unanswered question is a mistake, the seeker begins to recognize that some understanding simply arrives later. Just as the Qur'an sometimes opens with signs before explanation, life may also place small letters before the verses that reveal their meaning. And the person who learns to read those moments patiently begins to see the world differently. They stop demanding that every mystery be solved immediately. They begin to trust that meaning unfolds over time. For those who reflected deeply on Ilm al-Huruf, this patience was essential. The science of letters was never meant to produce instant answers. Its purpose was to train the heart to notice how meaning moves quietly through language, through revelation, and through life itself. And perhaps nowhere is this movement more personal than in the way human beings interact with sacred words every day. Because the moment a person begins to recite a divine name, slowly, intentionally, those letters are no longer only symbols on a page. They become part of the rhythm of breath, memory, and presence. And in that moment, language begins to do something extraordinary. It begins to reshape the one who speaks it. If the science of letters remained only a theory about language, it would hold little value for the ordinary believer. Knowledge that lives only in books rarely transforms a life. The real question for the seeker has always been simpler and more personal. What do these ideas mean for the way we speak, remember, and pray? This is where the teachings surrounding sacred recitation begin to feel less abstract and more intimate. Most people have experienced moments when their speech felt empty. A person repeats a prayer because they were taught to repeat it, but their mind wanders. Their lips move, yet their attention drifts somewhere else, toward worries, responsibilities, unfinished conversations. At other times, something very different happens. A person whispers a divine name in the middle of a difficult night, and suddenly the words feel alive. The breath slows. The heart becomes quieter. The same phrase they have spoken 1,000 times before begins to carry a weight they never noticed. What changed? Often it is not the words themselves, it is the presence behind them. Sufi teachers frequently reminded their students that remembrance, dhikr, is not merely repetition of sound. It is the gathering of attention. When a person speaks a sacred word while truly listening to it, the word begins to echo inwardly. The letters no longer pass quickly through the mouth, they linger. Take the divine name Ar-Razak, often translated as the provider. Someone facing financial stress might repeat this name again and again, hoping for relief. At first, the repetition may feel mechanical, as though the person is trying to convince the future to change. But with time, something subtler can happen. The person begins to notice the breath moving through each letter. The sound of the word slows their thoughts. Gradually, they remember how many forms of provision have already carried them through life: food, shelter, companionship, knowledge, unexpected help. The repetition of the name does not instantly change their circumstances, but it begins to change their awareness. Anxiety softens. The mind stops racing toward imagined disasters. Gratitude quietly enters the space where fear once dominated. In that moment, the recitation has already begun to do its work. Another person might turn to the name Ya Latif, O Gentle One, during a time of confusion. The word itself is soft, flowing easily from the tongue. Spoken slowly, it almost feels like a breath passing through open space. Repeating it does not guarantee that difficulties disappear overnight. Yet it can remind the heart that gentleness exists even within situations that feel overwhelming. The seeker begins to look more carefully for subtle forms of mercy. A conversation that arrives at the right time, a door that closes before deeper harm occurs, a quiet moment of clarity appearing in the middle of uncertainty. Again, the letters have not forced reality to change, but they have changed the way reality is seen. This is why many Sufi teachers emphasize that sacred language must be approached with humility. The purpose of repeating divine names is not to control the world. It is to bring the heart into alignment with truths that already exist. When a person speaks with sincerity, the letters begin to reorder their inner world. The breath becomes steadier, thoughts slow down, awareness deepens. The person who repeats the name gradually becomes more attentive to the quality that name represents. Someone who remembers Al-Hakim, the wise, becomes less impatient with the timing of events. Someone who calls upon As-Sabr, the patient, slowly develops endurance. Someone who reflects on Ar-Rahman, the merciful, becomes more capable of offering mercy to others. Over time, the letters become companions in the journey of the heart. But the teachers of Ilm al-Huruf also warn their students about a subtle danger. Sacred language can lose its dignity when it is treated as a tool for ego. If someone begins repeating divine names with the intention of manipulating outcomes or controlling other people, the spirit of remembrance disappears. The point was never to use words as instruments of power. The point was to allow words to purify intention. In fact, many teachers believe that the first transformation always happens inside the one who recites. Before circumstances shift, before answers appear, before life changes direction, something quieter begins. The heart becomes more attentive. A person begins to notice the difference between speaking absent-mindedly and speaking with awareness, between repeating words mechanically and listening to them as they rise from the breath. Slowly, the seeker learns that language itself can become a path. Every prayer, every verse, every divine name becomes a chance to return to presence. The letters forming those words are no longer rushed past. They are felt, heard, and allowed to settle within the heart. And when this kind of listening deepens, an unexpected realization often follows. If words carry meaning, if letters shape words, and if sacred speech gradually reshapes the one who speaks it, then perhaps the most important word we must learn to read is not written in a book. Perhaps it is the word being spoken through our own lives. Because the same wisdom that shaped language may also be shaping us. If we follow the reflections of the sages to their quiet conclusion, the science of letters begins to point toward something deeply personal. It is not only about the alphabet of a language. It is also about the language of a life. For centuries, Sufi teachers spoke about existence as something meaningful rather than accidental. The Qur'an describes creation as filled with signs, patterns that invite reflection. Mountains, rivers, the movement of the stars, the alternation of night and day, all of these are presented as verses written across the world itself. But the human being is also described as a sign. Not an error wandering through the universe, but a living expression of divine wisdom unfolding in time. From this perspective, the science of letters begins to take on a new dimension. If letters form words, and words form meaning, then perhaps each human life is also part of a sentence being spoken across the landscape of existence. This idea appears in many forms within Sufi thought. Ibn Arabi often suggested that every being reflects a particular aspect of divine reality, not in a way that turns people into something sacred, but in a way that reminds us that each person carries a unique responsibility within creation. Some people embody compassion. Their presence softens tension wherever they go. Others carry clarity, speaking truth even when it is difficult to hear. Some carry patience, standing quietly through hardship until others find their strength again. Each life expresses something, and often that expression becomes visible through the experiences a person passes through. Someone who has endured loss may become a source of comfort for others facing grief. Someone who struggled for years to understand themselves may develop a rare sensitivity toward the struggles of others. In this sense, the trials a person faces are not meaningless interruptions. They may be shaping the word that life is gradually speaking through them. Imagine a piece of calligraphy slowly appearing across a page. At first, the lines look disconnected. A stroke here, a curve there. The observer cannot yet see the final image. Only when the writing is complete does the meaning become visible. Human life can feel similar. There are moments that seem confusing or incomplete, a path that changes unexpectedly, a dream that does not unfold the way it was imagined, a relationship that ends without explanation. At the time, these moments resemble those mysterious letters we discussed earlier, signs that appear without immediate interpretation. But as years pass, patterns begin to emerge. A difficulty leads someone toward a different calling. A delay forces patience that later becomes wisdom. A closed door quietly redirects a person toward a path that eventually feels more authentic than the one they lost. What once looked like isolated strokes begins to resemble a sentence. This is why many Sufi teachers encouraged seekers to look back on their lives with humility rather than frustration. The human mind often demands clarity too quickly, yet meaning tends to unfold gradually, as though the story of a life is being written in stages. When a person begins to see their experiences this way, something shifts. They stop asking only, "Why did this happen to me?" Instead, they begin asking, "What might this moment be shaping within me?" That question opens a different kind of awareness. A person who once saw themselves as lost may begin to recognize a pattern of endurance. Someone who believed their life lacked direction may discover that every turn quietly prepared them for the place they stand today. The science of letters, in its deepest sense, invites this kind of reflection. It reminds us that meaning is rarely random. Just as letters combine carefully to form words, the experiences of a life often combine to form character. Your patience, your struggles, your acts of kindness, your moments of courage, all of these are strokes within the calligraphy of your existence. And perhaps the most profound realization is this: you do not need to become someone entirely different in order to live meaningfully. You simply need to become clearer in the word your life is already expressing. Some people spend years trying to imitate paths that were never meant for them. They compare their lives to others and assume they are failing because their journey looks different. But the beauty of language is that every sentence requires different words. A word of gentleness cannot become a word of force without losing its purpose. A word of wisdom cannot become a word of speed without changing its meaning. Likewise, each person carries a distinct combination of qualities shaped by their experiences. The path forward is not to erase those qualities. It is to understand them. When someone learns to read their own life with patience, they begin to see that even the difficult chapters contributed to the meaning being written through them. The disappointments, the waiting, the unexpected turns, all of these were part of the process. Just as letters gather slowly into words, and words into sentences, the events of a life gather gradually into understanding. And perhaps this is the final lesson hidden within the science of letters. Language teaches us to listen. Before we speak, we must listen to the sounds forming in our breath. Before we understand a sentence, we must read the letters that compose it. In the same way, before we fully understand our lives, we must learn to listen to the experiences shaping us. The universe may be speaking quietly through every moment. Through words, through signs, through the unfolding story of the person you are becoming. And when you learn to read those signs patiently, life begins to look less like a series of random events and more like a meaningful conversation. One that has been unfolding around you and within you from the very beginning. Perhaps the science of letters was never only about hidden knowledge inside an alphabet. Perhaps its deeper lesson is much simpler and much closer to our own lives. Every word we speak carries meaning. Every name we repeat shapes the way we see the world. And every moment we pass through may be part of a story still unfolding, like letters slowly forming a sentence whose meaning becomes clear only with time. So here is a quiet question to reflect on. Have you ever noticed a word, a prayer, or even a repeated moment in your life that later revealed a deeper meaning you didn't see at first? If this reflection resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Your experience might help someone else see their own life a little more clearly. And if you found value in this journey, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Voice of Sufism, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future reflections. You'll also see another related video appearing on your screen now. Feel free to continue exploring. Until next time, keep listening carefully. Sometimes the smallest signs carry the deepest meanings.